We're going to have a brief welcome from our publisher, editor extraordinaire. What is your actual title? I don't know anymore. The Czar of Cox, Ohio, Media Group Ohio, Janet Collier.
So welcome to Cox Media Group Ohio. We are the home of WHO TV, the Dayton Daily News, WHO Radio, and several other local media brands. And we're really honored to be able to host this forum tonight because I think it's an important community conversation. And that's part of our job as the local media, to be a forum for those kinds of conversations. Several of our staff are going to be participants on the panel tonight, but I also want you to know that while we're here to participate, we're also here to listen. And we will be listening to what you have to say and taking that as feedback. So thank you very much. We're very honored to have you here tonight.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to get started. My name is Amelia Robinson. I'm president of the Greater Dayton Association of Black Journalists. For those who are not familiar with what we do as NABJ, we are a chapter of the national group, the National Association of Black Journalists, and the organization has been around for more than 40 years. So we are firmly invested in diversity in newsrooms around the country, and what we do at GDABJ is focus on the Miami Valley. One of our key goals is to promote inclusivity of African Americans and other minorities. We also want to do what we can to make sure that news is balanced, that goes out to our viewers, listeners, and readers. So that is why we're here today, to sort of talk about one of the hottest issues that affects our community in Dayton and also around the country is perceptions of African American boys in particular. This is actually an offshoot of the national chapter's initiative that they've done for the last 2 years, which is the Black Male Project. Because we're a little slow in Dayton sometimes, we did ours a month later. And we're going to focus mainly on Black youth. We have a really cool panel of two different panels that are going to talk to us today, and we want questions from you guys too. I know a lot of people already got papers already. We're going to have some more paper going around. If you have questions about something you hear, feel free to flag down Dexter. He's not in here now, but you'll see him walking around. He's a tall dude who spoke earlier. He'll take your questions, and we'll try to condense them down. So I know we don't want to be here all night, so we'll condense questions down. If you have stuff even after that, feel free to even share more questions as we go along. So we're going to bring up our panel, our first group. First, we have Gerald Parker, who is Montgomery County Juvenile Court magistrate. English is my first language. We have Sean Walton, who is the Youth Outreach Director for Grace United Methodist Church. We have Ronda Moore, who is from Fox 45. She's a reporter who's been here for a long time. And she's a loyal NABJ member, right?
Yes.
Did you pay your dues, Ronda? Next, we have Frazier Smith, and he is a manager on our breaking news desk here at Cox. And finally, for the first group, we have Bakari Lumumba. I probably didn't say it right, man. I'm sorry. Say it one more time for us. Lumumba. There you go. All right, so we got the first group. So the first question, I just want to set the stage. Do you guys think that there is a difference in coverage of Black youth than there is in other young men? And anybody who wants to jump in can do it. We have 2 mics. One for, we don't have 2 mic stands, we have 2 mics, so you're going to have to share.
Why, thank you, Amelia.
We got to turn it on first, man.
Pretty good.
Sorry.
I'm auditioning here. You messed me up.
I'm sorry.
Okay, no problem.
And I want to remind people, we are on Facebook Live right now, so remember that your mother might be watching.
Try that again. Why, thank you, Amelia.
You're welcome, Sean.
Decent. Good work. I'll see you later. Absolutely. I mean, absolutely are they covered differently, you know? Some of it is African Americans historically have been good for profit. There are certain communities, I know I hosted a panel discussion once about kind of how to manage community image. And we had a local neighborhood here who was, kind of rebuilding. They were investing a lot of money. And the leader of that neighborhood association said that they had a rule in that community that they would only talk to the media about positive things, period. So you couldn't find the person to take the mic. So I think, yeah, I mean, the answer is yes, African Americans are definitely covered different in the media.
I guess I come at it from a different way, because I'm in the newsroom every day and we go over story ideas every day and what we're going to cover. And we don't say, oh, well, let's see, is that a black person or white person? Let's decide if we're going to cover it based on that. We never say that. And I know there's a lot of negative things that happen in the black community that we cover, but there's a lot of negative things that happen in the white community that we cover as well. And so for us, we're looking at the story, like what's the story? We're not looking at, is this a black story or is this a white story? If someone is busted for drugs in the black community, we cover it. If someone's busted for drugs in the white community, we cover it. We're not sitting there, and I know this is an unpopular thing to say, people probably don't believe me, but it's true. We don't sit there and decide what we're going to cover based on what race someone is. And I think if you look in Dayton, I think you see that the coverage is pretty fair and pretty even. We have just as many negative stories on black people as we do on white people.
Well, you get your own mic down.
Okay, wonderful. Good evening. I think that the media is a reflection of the society that we live in. And I think what we find, and I think we all know, that the society that we live in views African American males in a negative light. I always tell people that, including my son, that African American males are seen that their mere presence in this society is seen as problematic, right? We're seen as aggressive, inherently violent, criminal, etc., etc. So that is reflected in the media process, even if people aren't explicitly saying, hey, this is the reality of the situation. We can even argue that in positive situations, when African American males have achieved in an extraordinary manner. For example, Barack Obama, he gives his wife a fist bump, they say it's a terrorist fist bump, right? We can look at Colin Kaepernick. He protests in a peaceful manner and he kneels for the flag because a former Navy SEAL stated that doing so would be respectful to me as a veteran. People say, hey, this man is unpatriotic. So I think what we understand, if anyone who knows history, is that no matter what African American males do, it is seen in a negative context because we are seen as problematic to the further development of this society.
Okay. So for those who think that there is a disparity between the way African American boys are portrayed in the media, what is the solution? What would you like to see done differently?
But I think one of the solutions, and I hope I don't monopolize the conversation.
Well, don't, see the thing, we're all gonna share.
Okay, but I think what Sean said is very important, is that, the community decides that, listen, you can only report on positive media, right? We got Brother Anthony Head here, if you can stand up. We talk about reporting positive media. He was Daytonian of the Week here in Dayton, Ohio, in the Dayton Daily News. Just give him a round of applause. But that is an example of reporting positive media and changing the narrative, right? And with African American males aren't obsolete, they aren't single, they aren't dangerous, but they're hardworking citizens and community members who are working to better our communities, not make them worse. So I think accentuating the positive, not saying that we're going to look at things with a rose-colored lens, but understanding that we don't want to paint with a broad brush.
Considering that, though, what Ronda said earlier, there are problems. There are problems with black men, and there are problems with everybody else. How do you still cover those then and not be accused of painting a negative portrayal of black youth?
That's a great question.
Thank you. I went to college.
All right. Is that a rebuttal for me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or whoever wants to answer it.
Well, I think first and foremost, one of the things that we have to do is that oftentimes when we are looking at situations in which if people are behaved in a deviant manner by society standards, is we have to go out and get people that have an issue with that. For example, I remember there was a nightclub, the A-list nightclub, I think it was on Ludlow, right? And there was a shooting there in which a young man from Central State University was unfortunately shot and killed. The young man shot into the club, they had an altercation. Well, I was a member of several individuals that had a press conference calling that young man to turn himself in. So even though that was reporting a negative act that took place in the black community by an African-American male, there were other African-American males saying that this type of behavior is unbecoming, it is unacceptable, and we're calling this person to turn themselves into law enforcement. And as a result, we was able to turn a negative into a positive by showing that this type of behavior is unacceptable and we will not allow our community to be a sanctuary for criminals.
Well, I think we need to see a lot more of that. I think we need to see a lot more black men who are doing positive things in the community stand up and talk about things like that, especially when we see a lot of young black men getting into trouble, you know, doing a lot of negative things. I mean, I did a story today about a guy who shot and killed a guy in Trotwood overnight for trying to rob him and break into his business. And, you know, the store owner shot and killed him. And then I talked to a guy who works just a couple of doors down, who owns a business, who said, you know, there's like 5 or 6 businesses in a row, and he said, we're all carrying. We want them to know we're all packing, because we're not going to stand for this kind of stuff, them coming and, you know, stealing stuff. And so he was a positive voice, even though it was on a negative story, because here it was this young black man who owns his own business, and all the rest of them in that area like own their business. But yet it's these young black guys who are, you know, coming in there, ripping them off and trying to, you know, do negative things toward other black men. And so I think more black men who are established, who are on the ball, so to speak, need to reach out and talk to these young kids and try to help them more. And so that they don't see, you know, just the negative stuff in life and think that everything is negative. And like yesterday, we were on another story where a guy got killed, and you know, it was just kind of interesting to me because there was these young kids, and they were crowding around us and, you know, talking to me and my photographer. And the one kid, he probably was about 8 or 9, and he asked my photographer, he said something about the police. And my photographer said, well, we're not the police. And my photographer was white, not that it really makes a difference, but maybe in this case. So the kid was like, well, I'm glad you don't like the police. And my photographer was like, well, I didn't say I didn't like them. And he was like, well, I don't like the police. And, you know, and he just started saying negative things about the police. And I just thought, wow, that's sad that he's like 8 or 9 years old, and he already has that feeling that the police are bad and negative. And, you know, there's black police officers too who are protecting their community, who are doing positive things. But already at a young age, that kid had in his mind that police are bad. And, you know, maybe he needs to see a version of, you know, police officers that are not bad, but see the good side of them as well.
I think the initial question regarding how African-American men, especially boys, are portrayed, I can't answer that question. I don't know specifically. I don't necessarily know if there's anything intentional being done by news media, but what I can tell you is every black man grew up that you had to work twice as hard as non-black men. Okay. That being said, that translates to news media, where you're going to have to work twice as hard in order to show that there's a lot more black men doing a lot more influential things in the community. Because I can show you many of the African-American men around me that are doing so many things in the community, but you have to put the work in to go find them and then to do it and portray it. And if you really want to be a part of that and quell that and kill that stereotype, you have to look harder. And because they are there, all right? Because I know that. Being young African-American, I mean, I surround myself with folks that wanted to make me better, because when they get better and they do better, I want to do better. And that's the message I send to the youth who are in front of me. So they're there, but then you hear, well, I don't see them. I'm like, well, if you look hard enough, you'll find them. But again, it goes back to having to do things twice as hard, which is something that all African-American men had to learn to do from the beginning.
Let me just say quickly, too.
Don't bogart, Rhonda.
One last thing. One last thing. People always say, well, you just have to look hard or whatever. okay, we don't know everything that goes on in the community, in the media. We don't know everything. We don't know every group. We don't know. You guys need to reach out to us and tell us these positive things. Tell us that, hey, we got this group and we're doing this, that, and the other, yada, yada, yada. And then we can cover some of that stuff. Don't just think that we automatically know that there's this group here that's doing this and there's this group doing that. If you don't call the TV stations, if you don't reach out to people, if you don't reach out to me or other people and tell us, we oftentimes don't know. And if we know, oftentimes we'll cover it.
Let Frazier speak.
I think,
You're welcome.
I think what I'm hearing is that the community needs to help change the narrative in what we're trying to get out.
I don't like covering bad news all the time.
That's one of my colleagues over there, Allison Brown. Anyway, I think the community needs to help change the narrative, and what Rhonda says is very true. I've been in this business for longer than I'd like to admit, and the black community, and I hate that term, but it's not monolithic, and everybody does not think the same. Everybody does not act the same. Everybody does not believe the same things, and so the black community has got to reach out to the media to help us tell those stories that uplift the entire community. We've got a president running around now painting all of us with a broad brush saying, fake media, fake media, fake media. I am imploring everybody in this room to not believe in that hype, because what you're saying is not fake media at all. And what we're trying to do is to tell stories. Rhonda's right. We don't sit in meetings every day and say, well, we're going to cover this because it's black people, or we're going to cover this because it's white people. I have a peculiar place in the newsroom as one of the managers of our breaking news team, and I've got two sons. One is 28 and one's 26. They're both doing very well, but I'm telling you, I cringe every time I get an email from some police department saying that there's been another shooting. And we've all been at the end of that joke where we say, oh, there's been another school shooting, or there's been another terrorist act, and most of us in this room sit around and say, God, I hope it wasn't anybody black. And so, it's up to us, and we've been trying, when I say we, the media, we've been trying to reach out to tell stories that affect everybody from the perspective of looking at different topics that affect everybody. The economy affects everybody. The military affects everybody. Police-community relations affect everybody. It just doesn't affect only black people and only African Americans. I saw a very interesting story the other night out of Baltimore. And it is this group called the 12 O'Clock Boys. I don't know if anybody has ever heard of that group. These are black boys who ride around on four-wheel dirt bikes. They don't ride them in the dirt, they ride them in the street because they don't have any parks to go to. And so, and they're bored, they don't have anything else to do. And so what they do is they ride these dirt bikes up and down main streets in Baltimore at 50, 60, 70 miles an hour, popping wheelies. In one piece of the clip, the kid pulled up beside a police car and kicked the police car. And the police these kids are so fast they can't catch up with them. And that's a story that's really nobody out here in the Midwest knows about because it's not happening here.
Excuse me, it's happening. They do that here too.
Okay, good.
They ride up down my street every day in those
It was the first I heard about it. And 5 days a week, I'm listening to, part of my job is to listen to the police and fire scanners. And I do that 5 days a week, 8 hours a day. This is the first time I've heard that activity goes on here. So, the community's got to help us, and we've got to help the community. It's got to be a partnership in order for stories to be told correctly and forthrightly.
You ask for solutions, I'm trying to get it to you. Okay, first, one, black folks trend, and it's not a put down. I didn't say it was intentional or not intentional. Google it. There is a disparity in the way that African Americans are covered. See, I don't get emotional about it at all. I've been doing this for 30 years. I'm 50 years old. There's been lots of events, and I I've had great press. I love it. You know, I mean, look it up sometime. You guys treat me really, really well. But overall wise, one, you follow the things that are trending. You actually pull things straight out of social media at times, and you put it not because it's interesting, but because it's going to sell. Because this is a business, and if you can't sell commercials and the people, if you don't have viewership, the reality is that it's almost as if a zoo experience. Everybody knows that America is fascinated with the danger of African American male. Oh, that's wonderful. I want to pretend that I'm that way, but I don't really want to have to live through the experience. And I'm not saying whose fault it is, but you can follow the trends, the same things all of us see on Facebook. We've been in multiple schools this year. I've done a superhero following, did a Black Panther, how young people could pull out the superhero characteristics in themselves. There were multiple African American men, not 3, not 4, not 5. Each time we had 10 more African American men from across a number of different places. So, thank you. And so, here's the deal. One thing we will do, just so we're really clear, we've had Rites of Passage celebrations, Super Mentor Saturday where there were men there. So these things are not hard to find because we all follow social media. And Cox and all the other, I don't want me to pick on Cox because this is courageous, I really appreciate it. All media follows what trends, and black folks trend. Part of it, yes, we should not, honestly, we should run a campaign, don't get in front of the camera unless it's something positive. Honestly, I wouldn't give you a story. And if you edit this too much, it only takes clips. I'll never sit up here again.
Well,
I don't do that.
Let me ask you this, Sean. Thanks for all those good points, but let me ask you this. Let's say you live in a neighborhood where there's a serial killer. Mm-hmm. Do you still want people not to get in front of the camera to talk about what's going on in that community?
Those are extremes.
Oh, well, let's say you were I'll give you something easier. Let's say you're in a community that has a high and disproportionate amount of drug activity, or black on black violence, or domestic violence, or actual problems that are in these communities. How do you not get in front of the camera? Because as a journalist, and I don't want to start, being part of the panel, one of the problems I've always had is that when you want to talk about serious issues, oftentimes black people don't want to talk about them. And that does not make it go away. So how would you deal with that?
Well, one, I think black folks love to talk about serious issues just like the rest of America. Nobody wants to do anything. The difference is, it's simple. You sell it or you don't. Part of the reason why those communities have those issues, because people with resources move out of those communities. One of the reasons that people with resources don't move in those communities that can make a difference is because of the coverage. And because it's covered in a terrible way. Now don't get me wrong, young people broadcast themselves today. So you're still going to have negative images because they broadcast negative images over YouTube. However, outside of extremes, yes, we want to let folks know what's going on, but it's the difference. The difference is if I'm driving down the highway, I'm got my car, I see an accident. If I'm slowing down traffic, just looking, and I'm not an EMS, and I'm not going to help, I'm not going to do anything else, then bottom line, I'm holding something up, and I'm not being productive. If you come in a community in order to organize solutions, but if we're just being a town crier, but nobody's willing to answer the call, and I don't want to just say African Americans, I'm not blaming anybody. The reality is, we've been covering this stuff for many, many years. And after many years bringing attention to a rash of shootings in an area, if I've got a store in that area, nobody's coming to my store. It's shutting it down. So I do think you have to cover it. Don't get me wrong, I do think you have to cover it.
But if I could chime in, because I just want to veggie back on what Sean said. I'm going to say veggie back because I don't eat pork, so I'm not going to piggyback. I think what you're saying is true. There's an African proverb that says, talking doesn't fill a bread basket. And I tell my children that if you're telling me about it, you're not doing it. And this is true throughout the American social order. People like to talk about problems rather than actually do something about it. But I think we also need to understand, that part of the issue is, I believe, and I talked about this in my thesis, by the way, that there's a leadership crisis in our community. And the reality is, most of the leadership in the African American community is crisis-oriented. Something happens, people put on their Sunday best, they show up and they articulate and they elucidate about all of the ways that racism affects us and all of the areas of human activity. But the reality that I learned when I was in the military, I was a staff sergeant, by the way, chemical operations specialist in the Army, okay, is that the best form of leadership is preventive maintenance. And great leaders, great parents, Great mentors, they actively seek to prevent problems from taking place. Bad leaders, pseudo-leaders, pseudo-mentors, pseudo-parents show up after the fact and then try to rectify the issue. Okay? So that's just my 2 cents on that issue there.
Okay, another question here. What part do you think the law enforcement community plays in this whole perception? And, you know, we obviously have a magistrate up here. You probably have a very different perspective than most folks on the panel. So why don't you go first?
What's the question?
What part does the law enforcement community play in the perception of black youth?
That's a multifaceted question. I'll tell you multiple things. I started as a Montgomery County prosecuting attorney, so I was on the front lines. I was at the very beginning. One perception in the African American community, I again don't like using that word, is the fact that, and it goes along with the reactive portion. See, when we think about justice, all right, we think about the response to an issue, okay? Unfortunately, a young black male was shot, we have to protest, all right? Somebody was wronged, we protest. However, when I was a prosecutor, I was at the beginning. I was at the front lines because I saw at the very beginning the cases that were coming in and had the opportunity to say, wait, this doesn't sound good, this doesn't sound right, and we didn't even go forward with these charges because I could see if there was racial profiling and things of that nature. So why do I bring that up? There is this stigma that says that we have to be on the defensive, that we have to fight against somebody who's been wronged. However, again, we should be at the beginning and thinking that justice starts at the front end of these cases. We have this thing where we think that, you know, well, at the end of the day, somebody was charged with a crime, all right? And of course, they're wronged, and then we defend them. But I think our community needs to understand that we can be put in positions alongside law enforcement at the beginning of these cases, all right? So that way we're not always on the defensive. I say that because a lot of young attorneys or young students who want to be attorneys, they all want to be defense attorneys. They all want to defend. Let me tell you right now, by the time the defense has the case, witness statements have already been written, the police has already written the police reports, you are behind the 8 ball, which is why I wanted to start as a prosecuting attorney to be at the very beginning. So I think we need to transition our mind frame in getting at the head of these issues as opposed to being behind them, especially when it comes with law enforcement.
One quick question. I'm sorry to interrupt real fast. If you guys have questions you want asked, please give me the desk figure.
And if I could just chime in there, I don't know what role law enforcement plays other than if they get in front of the microphone and the camera and make disparaging comments, stereotypical comments about African American males. We do know that that is something that took place in the 1980s in Los Angeles, in which, you know, the chief of police characterized African American males as inherently violent. All of them were members of gangs, so on and so forth. And as a result, there was a lot of situations of police brutality, extrajudicial violence against African American males. But I also think that we also have to understand that, you know, there's an African proverb that states that the ruin of a nation begins in the homes of its people, right? And W.E.B. Du Bois talks about this very issue of criminality in the African American community in his famous book, Souls of Black Folk, that was written in 1903. And he talks about, because African Americans, we know the history of the criminal justice system, we know it's inherently racist, we know it started off with slave catchers, so on and so forth. And as a result, we oftentimes tend to see the person that's been charged with a crime as a victim, even though they've been accused of 90% of the time victimizing another black person. And he says, as a result, unfortunately, this is Du Bois talking, this is the Bakari Lumumba, this is W.E.B. Du Bois, it's the greatest African American sociologist that ever lived, argues that as a result, we oftentimes can make our communities more inclusive and welcoming to criminals than law-abiding citizens. This is a reality that we don't like to talk about, but it is very true. And so, once again, if you're someone who is conservative, you might talk about personal responsibility. If you're someone like me who is a Pan-Africanist, you believe in Kucha self-determination. Now, the second part of this, when we talk about the criminal justice system, is something Malcolm X stated over 50 years ago, is that in the African American community, you have more police, yet you have more crime. How is that possible? You have more police in the African American community, but you have more crime. And Malcolm said that the only way that can take place is that the police are in cahoots with the criminals. Now, there was a book written about 10 years ago called The Rich Get Richer and the Poor Get Prison. It was written by 2 white sociologists. One was at Eastern Michigan University, the other was at Michigan State University. And what they argued is that not preventing crime is good for business. Because if you prevent a crime, we aren't going to have any prosecutors. We don't have any judges or bailiffs or COs or correction officers and so on and so forth. So he says it's good for business to not prevent crime, but allow the crime to actually happen. So I think we have to look at it as twofold.
It's difficult to lay that much weight on law enforcement. Not that they don't have anything to do with it. I think that's an interesting question, because outside of the fact that who gets arrested, who gets charged, outside of the tip you may get, on a case that comes from within the police department. Outside of that, I think it's kind of difficult to, if you ask the question, what role does law enforcement play in media coverage? Outside of, who they choose to arrest, because that's the gateway, outside of who the prosecutor chooses to charge, because that's a choice, often. Outside of those things, I think it's difficult for law enforcement to really play a real serious role. Or, I don't mean to seem naive. Now, I understand I've lived a lot, so there's nothing naive about me. I've been active consistently for 30 years on all levels of this, direct grassroots, on a governing level, on an administrative level, and I just think that's a lot of weight to just put on law enforcement.
Earlier, we were talking about, you want to say something on that?
Oh, no.
Earlier, we talked about leadership and lack of leadership in the Black community, or lack of obvious leadership in the Black community. What are the role models right now in Dayton for Black youth? Like, are there role models that come to your mind right now as leaders in the Black community? I guess not.
No, that's a very tough question. I'll be honest. I'm trying to be one. I've always tried to be one in the community. I started an at-risk program. I hate that term, but I started a program through CrossFit where I bring in kids who are actively or on or not on probation through our serious, intense workouts to get them out of their environment. Now, I bring them from primarily West Dayton every week, from every Thursday, 5:30 to 6:30, and we work out. They learn to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, and that was very important. Not because you all may think, well, it's great, it's helping out primarily young Black men. No. The folks who are living in Centerville are learning a lot about that too. Okay, the way that they view young African American men is changing because we're bringing these youth to Centerville, because these folks in Centerville don't know how to drive through downtown Dayton in the first place, okay? So we bring them to Centerville, and what's been happening in that area because of the program and because of the work through members of probation and building bridges is there is a connection. These youth are actually being adopted by the folks in Centerville. They're realizing that this kid who my child never would have engaged with is just like my child. Also what's happened is, and I see my chef over there, Whole Foods is out there, Chipotle is out there. Unfortunately, those restaurants are not in West Dayton and unfortunately in African American communities. So they're having the opportunity to expand and see what's outside of their communities, which they don't get to see as well. And these folks in these communities in Centerville are starting to pour in resources, and hopefully we can get that back in the city of Dayton. But again, it is taking, and when James Brown came out to do this story, the first thing he asked was, who else is doing these types of things? And there's a bunch of names that were given, and he's working on those. But that's how it starts, is as we continue to spread as to who else are doing things in the community and who I've been working with. So to go back to the initial question.
Well, and I would like to say that I don't think there's a lack of leadership in the Black community. I think there's a crisis in leadership, and I see some leaders in here right now. We have David Greer, Baba David Greer, Anthony T. Head, Stephen Muhammad, Maha Selassie. Okay, so we have a lot of leaders, but I stated that I believe there's a crisis in leadership in terms of, is the leadership bringing about the desired goal, right? But I also think that leadership first starts in the household. Your first leader, if you're a young man, should be your father. That's the first person you should look up to. If the father isn't there, it should be a family member, older brother, older cousin, uncle, grandparent. If they're not there, then you turn to the community, the church, the mosque, the synagogue, the community center, etc., etc. But I would not argue that there's a lack of leadership. I would argue that there's a crisis of leadership, okay?
Lots of leaders, lots of role models. I think we have to be careful of putting the sort of pressure on African Americans to find who's a leader. Reality, who's the leader in Centerville? Outside the mayor, who's the leader in Huber Heights? Suddenly we're expected to govern ourselves police yourself, govern yourself, but pay your taxes. Nah, at the end of the day, and I say it with love, y'all. I mean, I'm intense, but I'm a loving person. I work with young people and all people over the years. But reality is that leader and role model is situational. Everybody can be a role model. Everybody can be a role model. But leader is based upon opportunity. So there are leaders that are in the household. There are fathers. We've got tons of pastors. We've got grassroots workers. Like I said, I've been around for 30 years doing this stuff. We got Marlon Shackle. I hate to call out names because there's just so many people. I'm looking over the crowd. So we really don't have a lack of leaders, or even, so that matter, a lack of father, because there's a huge trend. I was a 17-year-old father. My son is married with 2 children. When they have an event, they got 50 couples with children. My 2 children have been to probably 6 weddings this year already. They're getting married at mass numbers. As folks are gentrifying, they're buying the gentrified community. So there's a lot of great things going on, and I don't say that so I'm not a person, oh, woe is me, poor little us. I'm saying that we've got to do a great job of reaching out to you folks, but role models, we got them all over the place. There's not a lack of role models in the African-American community. There's not a lack of leaders in the African-American community. Just as any other community, any leader has to fight against selfishness. So what happens is that you're a great leader, but as you start to climb the ladder, your perspective changes. Not because you want to, just because you're higher. That blade of grass looks like carpet to you. It looks like it's all one green thing, right? But to the ant, that blade of grass is a redwood. It's huge. And because leaders climb, sometimes they have a tendency to change. And that's just not an African-American community issue. That's an American issue. It's a human issue. It's a worldwide issue.
I have to co-sign on both these young men. I learned a long time ago that once you become an adult, there are people who are watching you. They're watching your every move. And this is I think, what I interpret he means by a crisis of leadership. There's a lot of people who don't understand that when you are an adult, whatever job you have, whether it's garbage man or vice mayor or prosecutor, whatever the job happens to be, there's somebody, a young person, who's watching your every move. And if you're not doing what you need to be doing the right thing, that's where the crisis in leadership comes. You never know when the kid will walk up to you and ask you something, or he'll say, or she'll say, I saw you the other day say something nasty to somebody on the street. Why'd you do that? And you have no idea. But we all of us who are adults in here need to get a clue. If we're going to turn this leadership thing around, we got to understand there's somebody watching every move we make. They might not be our children, they might not be our nieces and nephews, they might not be our grandchildren, but they're kids in your church, they're kids at school, you teachers out there, you folks who run into young people every day, school bus drivers, school crossing guards. These people are watching every move we make, and that's where we can, kind of turn the leadership thing around when we understand that the spotlight's on all of us to contribute.
Okay, here's the last question before we break, and I think I'm paraphrasing one of the questions that we were given from the audience. Now you have a room full of journalists, or at least a couple of journalists. Tell me a positive story about a young black boy in this community that we should be covering.
Absolutely. I would like to mention my son, who is in the audience this evening. He's like, I put him on the spot, right? Amelia Lumumba, he'll be turning 11 next week, by the way. Yes. But also, he is a budding world-class swimmer. He had the Midwest Regional Swim Championship about 2 weeks ago in Indiana, and he was in first place for his age group, high point medal. Yes. And he also is a budding bibliophile. He reads the New York Times every morning. Yes, so we were teaching him to, read a world-class newspaper, and I teach him to be competitively smart. I teach him that in the 21st century, we're living in the age of globalization, in which you not only have to compete against other people here in this country, but throughout the world. And last but not least, he's also, he wants to be an actor. He says he thinks about getting an actor, and he thinks he has a face for television, right? Much better than his father. But he also, he's studying the Constitution right now, and I teach my son what is the use of having rights if you don't know what they are. So I think, one, example of a great African-American male is my son, Amelia Lumumba. And I don't think he's going to stand up because he wants to be shy.
Stand up, baby.
But
Stand
come
up.
on, come on. Yes, absolutely.
There is is this thing on? There is an intern we have in our newsroom. His name is Roberto De La Rosa Finch. And he's a New York City kid. He's a senior at the University of Dayton. And I, as a member of the breaking news team, I do a lot of hiring. And this is the third time I've had him back as an intern. This kid has been a student of mine over at the University of Dayton. He was one of the editors on the school newspaper last year. This year is his final year. He's going to be dealing with circulation issues for the student paper there. He's a young man who's very bright, very smart, a hell of a writer, and he's serious about what he wants to do. And so that's an example of a positive young black man who I'd like to introduce to you. He's not here now, but his name is Roberto De La Rosa Finch.
For me, I interviewed some guys. There was more than just one, but one guy I interviewed, his name was T. That was the only name that we could use because he's with the Victory Project. I don't know how many of you guys heard of that, but so I just learned about the Victory Project, and we did a story about it. And the guy T, he used to be in a gang. He used to be in a gang. He was robbing people. He was doing all these bad things. Went to juvenile court, and from there, the court didn't make him go to Victory Project, but he chose to go to Victory Project. And Victory Project just takes a lot of guys, kids, black and white, from all over the Miami Valley, not just Dayton, but from other places too. And like when I was talking to T, it was so hard looking at him, believing that he used to be a gang member and was going out robbing people's houses and businesses and stuff like that. He was so mild-mannered and very honest about what he did and the things he did. But he turned his life around, and I talked to some other kids there who hadn't gone as far as T had, but was on the verge and knew that they needed to change and do something and didn't like the way they were living their life and wanted to do something different. Or some of their parents, made them go. But these young men are so impressive, and they go there after school, they go there during the summer, they work, they get paid, I don't know, I think the guy said like 8 something an hour, he was happy about it, they work, and they're just good kids. And then they had a little prom, so we went and covered the prom too, their little prom at their Victory Project. And they learn how to be gentlemen. They learn how to, open the door. They learn how to pull the seat out for the woman. They learn how to dance. They learn all these good things in addition to, going to school. It's Christian-based as well. But just an all-around good project, and I met some really great young men through that project.
A young man named Alfred Taylor. Alfred was went to Dayton Public School here. Great young man, was able to be a very different young man. You could always tell he was different, I don't want to say he didn't fit in, he just had his own unique space. And Alfred was able to avoid getting involved in any gangs, never been to jail. He was raised in a single parent household. His father died early. He pushed through. I actually took him to his first high school party as part of what I call shared parenting. That's the style of programming I do. I don't program, I share parent, right? And as I took him to this, Alfred went on the right state, stayed there a couple of years, went to film school, had essentially conquered enough of that, got accepted to an incredibly, it was like, forget what the name of the art school is, but they do graphics arts and that sort of thing. It was $60,000 a year, I believe.
They're all 60.
Or more, right? Or more. This one, but it's like DreamWorks pulls people from there,
Full Sail in Orlando?
No, it was deeper than Full Sail. No, this was literally like the Harvard or the of art schools, right?
Of Art and Design.
Perhaps.
Or Ringling, those are two top animation schools.
Maybe Ringling. And what the young man did, since he didn't have the money to continue to go to school, right? He was only able to stay there for a quarter. But he sat in the back of everybody's classroom, all the upperclassmen, with his notebook out. And he stayed in the back of that classroom so long that professors started to say, "Hey, are you in this class?" And he said, "No, but I need the information." So that young man, this was already an incredibly intense program. I mean, one that keeping up with your own work on his own is enough. But after he was done with his classes, he went to other classes. So the reality is that this young man didn't finish with a degree because he just didn't have the money. However, his level of art is amazing. He's a solid young man. He works at Walmart during the evening as he tries to buy something where he explains to me, "I need a machine big enough that I can draw with my arm rather than my wrist so I can illustrate." Right? So here's a young man who has stayed on the straight and narrow. He is a brilliant individual, a talented artist, really cover him, and I'm telling you, you folks won't be sorry. And this is also economics. He'd like to be able to purchase that machine. He does commission artwork. Oh yeah, I do that. So we can't just talk about it. Without money, it's nothing.
Right.
It's nothing. I was a great guy, Sean. Help more kids. I got a new kid for you. But you don't have anything for me to feed them with. The reality is this young man can add something here. I've got a list of other young men as well. But this young man, Alfred Taylor, and Malcolm. Is Malcolm still back there? Malcolm, great. That young man back there, because he came in this room, I've watched him grow. He's an artist. I asked him what he did musically, and he's making his way. These are young men. I worked with him a number of years ago. I'm not responsible. I just got a chance to participate. But Alfred Taylor is one that I like to point out, and you can see plainly that don't just help young people who have been in trouble.
That's right.
You give them an incentive to get in trouble.
Right.
Don't just cover young people who've been in trouble. Cover young people who have never been in trouble. Right? Sean Walton Jr., a child to a 17-year-old father and a 16-year-old mother. Grew up in the 1500 block of West Grand. Walton Brown Law Firm right now.
That's right.
Okay? For a number of years. And he covers police shootings and other stuff. He also represents police officers. And I missed a role model in the room. A role model is Mark Ecton, Assistant Chief of City of Dayton. Mark, raise your hand. Y'all see him just a little bit. I mean to front you out, but you're a role model.
I'll be brief, just because I am at the Montgomery County Juvenile Justice Center. Come to that Montgomery County Juvenile Justice Center and see how some of the folks there are doing things different. Probation officers. Also, I'm going to call out two real quick. Austin Smith, young African-American male. Michael Allen. Austin Smith is on the front lines with these youth, going to their homes and trying to make sure that they can avoid coming back in front of me. Okay? These folks are in the trenches. Unfortunately, Montgomery County Juvenile Court, we are seeing the worst of the worst situations. All right? So, Austin Smith, Michael Allen, who's in the behavioral treatment, we call it J-Care facility in downtown, they don't just show up to work, eat lunch, and go home. The way they interact and the way we all interact, because we are in our young mid-30s, all right, we are talking to these youth a little bit different than other folks can. And when you come and see how they interact with the youth that are in there, you'll see how there are folks there trying to make a difference within the juvenile justice system. Because I'm going to tell you right there, as a Montgomery County prosecutor, they're going straight from juvenile court to the adult system. And we've got people in juvenile court right now that are working there, you know what's off, to try to change the narrative. Thank you.
Okay, real quick, this is a question that I don't think anybody else will be able to ask. Two people said this. Please explain the aversion to the term Black or African American. Real quick, anybody want to take that? The aversion to the word, to the term Black or African American community. Real quick, real quick, real quick.
I think the aversion to it is that it paints a perception of the black community being a monolith. I mentioned that earlier. When you say black community, everybody thinks you mean one big group of people who think the same, do the same, act the same, talk the same, walk the same, worship the same. That's not true. And so, unfortunately, it's one of those constructs that the media has helped to build. You never hear people say white community, they say black community. You never hear them say white leader, they say black leader. You never hear them say, well, let's go talk to the white minister in the neighborhood. They all say, let's go talk to the black minister in the neighborhood. And so this language becomes coded, and it's a subconscious thing that a lot of us don't even understand what's going on. And so we have to kind of break through that kind of mindset. And it's tough to do, it's tough to do. So that's my take on it, I know.
And I'm gonna give a different perspective. I actually am not averse to it. I actually embrace it. I am a Pan-Africanist. I am someone who is unapologetically African, and I believe that you always bet on black, okay? Now, I do know that we are not a monolithic group, but I do understand that there is a reason why we took on identifying ourselves as African Americans or black due to the reality is that we weren't seen as being American. We are something other. We have a history and a heritage that we should be proud of and that we come from. And also that this is the same thing as the case with the Latino community or the Italian community or the Jewish community. They self-identify as a racial ethnic group, and I think that we shouldn't have a problem doing that as well.
Okay, well, thank you. As you can see, we have different opinions.
Ladies and gentlemen, give them a round of applause.
Yeah. So,